right, like I said, I'm going to go, we'll be done before, right, no later than 4 o'clock today, all right? There's a couple things I want to go over as we start to transition away from C and transition into Objective-C. What I did was, there's a folder out there on the P drive for the class, you know where it is, but there's a folder out there that's got today's date on it. And if you go to that folder, what you're going to find in there is a series of articles that's Learn Objective-C tutorial. So I was going to go over some of those, and some of it expects that you're on the system, so I'm not going to go that far in them. All right. I've been trying to get a hold of Terry Prindle to see about virtualizing these machines to put OS X on them. He's been in meetings. All right, so I've left him a message for him, and hopefully I can meet with him tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So hopefully tomorrow between 8 and 9 I'll lecture on Chapter 10 in the Joomla stuff, and then when we go on break I'll go upstairs and talk to him. We'll see how it works. So what you'll see in there again is there's 6 different articles from Toots Plus, all right, and I'm going to go over some of that material right now. In addition, there's also an Objective-C tutorial that's there from Tutorials Point. Notice it's 190 pages. It's pretty comprehensive. All right, so if you want to start looking at it, you can already see, if you take a look in here, all right, this is a kind of program that you would literally write. This is the equivalent of the kind of stuff that we have been doing where we've been using printf. So notice how much, in this case, this is not GUI. So look at how much this looks similar to what we've been doing. Again, instead of saying an include, we're going to have an import. All right? We're going to get into what all the foundation stuff means. We're going to talk about Cocoa Touch and a few other things as we go on in here. I don't want to get into that right now. But you'll notice int main, that looks kind of like the stuff we've been doing. All right? But notice how this starts to change with a line that's right here. It looks a little bit weird, and not to be funny, it's only because it's a little bit weird. Everything in this language is an object. Everything. All right? And if you want to print something literally, like when we did a printf so it would print on the screen, here you use nslog. All right? There's a log that you can use, for example, if you're working in JavaScript. Maybe some of you have used it when you're trying to debug, where it's console.log. Here it's nslog. NS stands for next step. All right? And many of the things that they do in here are going to have NS in front of them. They all stand for next step. Again, I probably have said this before, but on the off chance I have not. When Steve Jobs was kind of ousted out of Apple or out of Mac, he started his own new company, and that next step is what they used for their operating system. When he came back again to Mac, to Apple, he brought that with him. All right? So the syntax looks a little hinky, because you'll notice the hello world doesn't look bad, but what about that @ sign there? That basically means that you're working with an object. All right, you're gonna get used to using that @ sign, and it's going to look weird with some of the code and some of the stuff that we put into this. Just, I mean, for lack of better words, you've been warned. All right. So, like I said, you can see that it's very, very detailed as far as what's in here. Now, a lot of the stuff that's in here, if I was going through this right now, I'm not, but if I was going through it with you right now, I wouldn't go over a lot of it. Like, what do you do, a while loop in Objective-C or you do it in C? It's going to look the same. An if statement is going to look the same. So some of that stuff we're not even going to touch on. It's going to hit the stuff in here that's new. So what does that mean? Well, if you look in here, again, this is a series of 6 articles. And it's a little dated. Notice it's July 2010. All right, so it's more than 4 years old, but it's one of the better series I've found out there that's basic and I think does a nice job. All right, well, this whole first thing that's 9 pages long. All right, the whole thing. Let's see. Really, about the only part that's worth reading on there is this part from all 9 of those pages. Objective-C is an object-oriented language that lies on top of C. In other words, it's a superset of C. I showed that to you before, where I drew a big circle and put Objective-C in it. Then I drew another circle inside and put C in it, meaning that C is a subset of Objective-C, or Objective-C is a superset of C. And one of the things that they say in here is, again, you can go write straight C in there if you want to, and it'll work just fine. right, that's the good news. All right, the bad news is, so to speak, is you're not going to want to do that because then you're not able to take advantage of all the functionality the language has. All right, and that's literally it, as far as I remember from this first article. I went and looked through it right before a class. I know I'd annotated right there. That's it. All right. Part 2. Then it starts getting a little more specific. They even mention in there that it says this week we start to transition over from C to Objective-C. All right? So some of the stuff, the reason I wanted to go over this was just to introduce you, for lack of better words, in a soft kind of way, to the syntax. All right? Now, one of the things that I want to do, if you're interested, if you're not, it's fine. I have to go and see if I can find it. My hope is it's still out there someplace, but I have to find out where on the system it is. All right. Last year when I taught the 152-153 class, which is the mobile app development -iOS, we used a book that I still have out there someplace, and I've got a copy of it. I've got a PDF, and I'm going to give you the PDF. All right. It's a pretty good book. Okay, it's written by a guy named Brian, it's like Hildebrand, I think it is, and it's pretty well done. But what I want to see is if I can grab all those lectures, if they're still around. I'm hoping that either I save them or that IT still has them. Then I want to take all the MP4s, upload them to YouTube, and have all those lectures available to you. Because then you'd have the books, all right, on an electronic copy of the book, and you'd have those lectures. And that's the book I used last year for the regular class. I'm probably not going to use it again next time because there's some newer ones, and that book is a little bit older. But the lectures and stuff, the stuff that's in there is still pretty good. And I don't mean my lectures are good, but I just mean that stuff in the book is pretty good. Let me check very quickly. I don't want to waste my time or your time. I think you're being way too kind. 153, iPhone. All right, spring 2014. Come on, someplace in here, let's check. You can see I found a few PDFs on this stuff, but I'm looking for the one. That's not it. I'll have to look because I have it someplace. If I don't have it here, I have it in my own junk. Okay, but someplace in here I've got the, I know because I found it, the PDF for it. All right. You have to make sure I do that for next time. Now, the guy who wrote this is English. Why am I telling you that? Because some of the stuff that he says in here, when he doesn't talk about filling up with gas, he talks about putting petrol in the car. All right? And it's only the English that I hear call this object-orientated as opposed to object-oriented. So when you look at it, I just took it verbatim. I didn't change anything. The only thing I changed on a couple pages, not even on yours, but just on my copy, is if something broke funny on a page, I hit enter or did whatever. But I didn't change a word of this because it's not mine. And I don't think that's right to change it. All right. So the author says in here, you got this language. You got a language already, and it's called C. So why use Objective-C? The idea is you can do a lot of different things with C, but you can't create object-oriented programs in C. Okay? Now, there is C++, and you can create object-oriented programs with C++. Probably shouldn't even tell you this, but you can also create iOS apps with C++. It's not the recommended way of doing it, but sometimes there are libraries and there are things that are C++ that you might want to bring in to an Objective-C program, and you can do that. You can also combine, you can mix and match and write some of your stuff in C++ and some of your stuff in Objective-C. So, gee, Jeff, why aren't you showing us that? Well, I'm already showing you 3 languages in 17 weeks. I didn't think you would really want a 4th. And the syntax on that is really different. It's not like the stuff that we looked at in C. All right? You use cin and you use cout instead of printf and scanf. And you use double greater thans and double less than signs when you're doing that stuff. So I didn't want to go into that stuff. All right. So some of the stuff you've heard already. What they're talking about here is, what he'll start using in here is he says, imagine we've got a car. The car is an object. All right. So a car is an object of that kind of class. I've got a 1998 beautiful Jeep out there with pieces missing in it. All right, but that thing is my Jeep object that's part of the Jeep class. So all Jeep Cherokees that were made in that year have features in common. All right, they could have different colors. It's possible, I don't think they made it in a two-door, but maybe they did, where you could get it in a two-door or a four-door, etc. But basically it's the same car. All right, so again, the idea is when you're working with object-oriented programming, you're creating objects out of classes. You've heard this stuff before. All right, they talk about the cookie cutter things. We've talked about that before. All right, and if you got this nice object, objects contain what? Methods and properties, right? That's what an object is. And what are the properties? That's the variables. What are the methods? Those are the functions. All right, where this is going to start changing is right here. This is the syntax that you use in Objective-C. So in other words, if I wanted to say, hey, take Dan's car and call the add gas method, I do it like this. You put it inside of brackets. You might say, well, yeah, what about like this? That's kind of the way we did a little bit in C, and that's kind of the way we did stuff in structures. Well, sometimes in Objective-C you can still use that syntax. Sometimes you can't. So the way I'm going to show it to you is we're going to pretend that that particular syntax for now doesn't even exist. So you've got to get used to this type of syntax. In other words, a bracket, not a curly brace, but a bracket, all right? Then the name of the object and the method that you want to call on that object. Does that make sense? Gets even uglier if you want to add parameters. You're going to see that. It gets really, really ugly. All right? And again, you say, well, why? I didn't make the language. It's a cool language, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with it. There really is. All right? I already told you what attributes are. Okay, this is where, again, it'll start looking different than, quote, regular C, unquote. All right, when we come in here and we start talking about interface and implementation. All right, here's the whole interface for the file. So let's talk about some of the stuff that's in here. Okay, what this says is what we have in here is we're creating an interface for a car. Now, what's the difference between an interface and an implementation? Okay. If you look at it, if I get into my car, all right, and I back it up, I put it in reverse and something starts happening, that's my interface. What's really happening under the hood, I not only don't know, I don't care about. So the interface is what you show the public. The implementation is the code that you use in order to make the interface do what it has to do. Does that make sense? All right. What you have to do in Objective-C is you have to define both your interface and your implementation. So, you know, these are just some blank lines. I could get rid of all of blanks if I wanted to in here. Put it like that. Boom. I'm not sure why they have that import line in there, so I'm not even going to go into that right now. But I want to go into this and all this. Oh, I know what it is. This says this is the beginning, basically, and that's the end. But let's just talk about this. What this says is I've got a car. Okay, that car inherits from, it's colon, followed by a class. So car inherits from NSObject. You say, well, NSObject, you know how I mentioned to you in Java how everything inherits from object? It's the same kind of thing. All right, but you have to say it here. You have to say where it inherits from, even if it's NSObject. And when we first start, a lot of the stuff that you create you'll create it off of NSObject. All right. So what is this saying? In English, this says, well, a car has a float, okay, and that float is going to be called fill level. And that car has a method that's called add gas, and it doesn't return anything. Does all that make sense? I'm going to get to the minus in just a second, but does everything I just said make sense? All right, because this is a real simple interface. When we start actually writing code, the interfaces will get more complex. Now, you'll notice that here, there's a minus sign. If there's not a minus sign, do you want to guess what kind of sign would be there? So we had Travis's in here. He'd say 3. All right? But it would be a plus sign. When you put a minus sign in there like that, it means it's a private method. When you put a plus sign in there, all right, it means that it's a public method. Don't even worry about protected right now. I'm just going to go in private and public. But you have to let the system know when you're creating these things, is it public or is it private? The difference between them is if it's public, you write one for the entire class and they all share it. All right. If it's private, you write one for each object. Well, this is called add gas. It would be nice if I could write one method and be able to add gas once and have the gas be added for everybody's car. It's not how life works, at least as far as I know. So every car object needs its own add gas routine. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Sort of. Okay. All right. So this is all explained in here. So everything I'm telling you is explained in here. I'm giving you my words because, like I said, don't really want to sit and read to you. Implementation. As it says, we'll talk about that next time. So that's in the next one. All right, so that's the second one. And again, not trying to waste my time, not trying to waste your time. The reason I decided to do it like this was I thought, well, I know you're still working on the C stuff, so I didn't want to spend more than an hour on it. Okay, I haven't gotten these machines virtualized yet. So I started to look through some of my old stuff, and I said, okay, what could I go through that would at least get them acclimated to the syntax, all right, and show you some stuff, all right? And I found this. Like I said, I've used this before. I think it's pretty well done. All right, so it says last week we looked at how we put separate classes into separate files. This week we'll look at classes again and in more depth. So they go back and they review what a class is and what an object is. They give you the history about when Jobs left Apple and founded Next. You can read all that stuff on your own. That's fine. But here, as it says, these are some of the classes that you're going to use a lot. NS string, NS mutable string, NS array, NS mutable array, NS number. And there's two more that they should have mentioned there because you use them a lot, but they're not mentioned here. And they're NS dictionary and they're NS mutable dictionary. So what's the difference, as an example, between NS string and NS mutable string? Just make it real simple. That if you create a variable that's of type NS string, you have to initialize it, and then it can't change. It's mutable. I'm sorry, it's immutable. It cannot change. But if you make it of type NS mutable string, that means that you can add to it, remove from it, add, change it to point to something else or whatever you want. So when you say something is immutable, you set it and forget it. When something is mutable, you set it, but you can change it afterward. All right? You can make a change to it. You can, no, what? Okay. So if I created something that's of type NS string and I initialize it, so I've got a field that's called name, and it's of type NS string, and I set it equal to Mark Lestarge, okay? And I put it in double quotes like that. It can never change. I can't change it. But if I set it to NS mutable string, and I think your real name is Mark, right? But let's just assume for a second it was Marcus, and I didn't know that. But if it was NS mutable string, I could go back in and I could change it from Mark to Marcus. But I can't do that with an NS string. Because with an NS string, once you've set it, it's set. No, we're not playing with types. All right, it becomes more apparent when you talk about this. All right, because this is like a Java array versus an array list. Because with an array, you set it, you initialize it, boom, it can never change. When I say it can't change, the size of the array cannot change. But if I do it as an NS mutable array, I can make the array grow and shrink on an as-needed type of basis. All right. Again, the one that's in here that I wish they would have mentioned, but they didn't, and I'm going to put it into mine just because otherwise I'll forget to talk about it. So, again, I'm not going to save this, but there's NS dictionary and there's NS mutable dictionary. And you use these a lot because it's not an array of objects, it's key value pairs that are immutable. And NS mutable dictionary is key value pairs that are mutable. Again, you might say, what? Sometimes you literally, what I might have, for example, is I might have a list of every person going to Blackhawk Technical College. And their key would be their BTC ID number. Make sense? Does to me. And their value would be their name. Okay? So if I don't have them in any kind of order, let's say there's 5,212 people that go to BTC. So I've got literally, I create this dictionary that's got 5,212 members in it. And I'm looking for certain people. But I don't have, I've got a list of people that's not in any kind of alphabetic order. I just want to know, are they in there or are they not in there? Is John Wanda a student here or is he not a student here? That kind of an idea. That's why you use a dictionary, because it allows you to go through a list of items very quickly to just see whether something exists or it doesn't exist. All right? There really isn't exactly a corresponding thing like this in C. It's sort of like a structure, but it isn't like a structure. All right? But I at least wanted you to hear that. Okay? Also, notice NS number. Well, there's not just NS number, because there's NS integer and there's NS, all the good ones that we've talked about before. All right? Now, you all, hopefully at least, you all remember this, that, for instance, and I am going back, I'm doing this on purpose. If I go back and do something like this, okay? So if we did this in Java, so if I come in here and I say string x equals 23, okay? And then I've got int y equals parse, what is it? It's integer dot parse int x, right? So y should now be equal to the number 23, correct? Say yes, correct. See, I want to make sure you're all still listening. All right, so yes, it's correct, okay? Well, the reason that I'm telling you that is, the reason that oftentimes you use NS number is it's very good. This is called a wrapper class right there, all right? And NS number is kind of the wrapper class for what we'll be working with, okay? It's a generic wrapper class, okay? Again, if it's immutable, it's dynamic, meaning it can be changed. If it's mutable, I should say, it means it's dynamic. If it's immutable, as it says, when you create it and assign a value, it's static, so it can't be changed. All right? So this is the kind of stuff that we're going to work with. So let me because there's all these, let me just add all this stuff to the dictionary. Yeah, but the thing is, this is gonna be in a bunch of the other articles, so this way I've got it in there, and I don't really give a damn what the hell is in my dictionary, so I'll let it bloat like crazy. I don't really care. All right, good enough. So let's really quickly look at this. So what do we have? Well, there's int main, and I mentioned this to you in class on Monday when you've got an int argc const char star argv. What that literally means is this represents a count of all of the parameters you might conceivably want to pass into main. All right, I'm sorry. Yeah, really, it is what you want to pass into main when you run the program. You always pass one thing in, whether you realize it or not. That's the name of the program. That's always in here. That's always argument 0. Always. But with the stuff we've been working on, we haven't passed anything else in, so we didn't have to worry about it. This just says we've got an array, all right, of strings, basically, and that's what you want to pass in. So that's how many, and that's what they are. If you say, do I really need to care? No, because we're not doing anything with it anyway. But this is what I want to show you. Again, notice, everything that's in here is a pointer. NS string star test string. What does that mean? It means that this is a string pointer. This isn't the same syntax that we used before. Okay? Every time that you create something, you've got to both allocate it and you've got to initialize it. So this says take test string that we just declared there, which right now has nothing in it, and allocate it right there. I know I don't want you to do that. I want you to do this. All right, it says allocate that, allocate the amount of space I need, however much space the system puts aside for a string. All right, Then call the init method of the parent. That's kind of like calling super. Okay? So when you get done, now you've got a string that has nothing in it. But now, this is what we did previously with this, is we would have said something like equals, double quote, double quote. You can't do that now, because this language doesn't allow you to do that. You have to do it like this. The good news is you'll end up doing that for just about everything you create. So you'll get used to it real quickly. All right. Test string equals. Again, there's that pesky thing in there again. All right. It says we're working with a string object. So we put the @ sign in there. Notice, because you're going to do it. I still do it all the time. That @ sign cannot, say it again, that @ sign cannot go inside of the double quotes. Otherwise, it thinks you want to print out an @ sign. Okay? And then we log it. So if we ran this program, literally what would show on the bottom of the screen would be, here's a test string in test string. That's all it would do. Well, that seems like a hell of a lot of work to just do that. I'm not saying it's not. All right. The good news is, by the time we actually start writing real code in here, I'm giving you the code. And I'm going to give you some code, and then we're going to go over it. And I'm going to give you some code, and we're going to go over it. If I can find those lectures that I did last year, I probably have about anywhere from 20 to 50 programs I went over. And I will give you all that stuff. All right? So they explain in here what the int main is. Then they explain in here the fact that you're creating a pointer to an NS string object. Then they explain that if you wanted to, instead of writing this as one line right here, you could have written it as 2 lines. If that makes more sense to you. I'm going to always write it as 1 line, because that's the way you see it in quote, real life, unquote. All right? Then they explain what you're doing here, and they explain what's happening in the NS log. So if you didn't like my explanation, that's good. Then go back and read the article. All right? And I realize how hard it is. We all have our own situations. If you say, you know, Jeff, you give us all this good information, I'd really like to read it, but I don't have time. I can get that. I can understand that. Well, then at a minimum, you really should be reading your book. All right, the other quotient book, the quotient Objective-C book, because this stuff will all be explained in there also. I'm just giving you it in one period, a high-level overview. All right. So when you run it, okay, somewhere in here, I don't know where, but there it is. Here's a test string in test string. When we first run a few programs in here before we get into GUI stuff, you're going to see a lot of stuff like this. But always, just so you know, always when you run these things in NSLog, it always gives you the date and the time. So every time you run it, you're going to have a date and a timestamp. I think, I'm not sure, but I think the reason that that's done is if you're logging stuff, so you've always got the log of when you did the run. Okay, the date and the time on the log. All right. And I meant if you're saving it to a file someplace. All right. It says, remember earlier we talked about NSString in the init method? It says NSMutable string. Actually, NSMutable string is a child of NSString. NSMutable array is a child of NSArray. Why? Because it does everything an array does, plus it has to be mutable. NSMutable string does everything a string does, but it also has to be mutable, so you're adding on to it. So NSString is the parent of NSMutable string. NSArray is the parent of NSMutable array. NSDictionary is the parent of NSMutable dictionary, etc. All right? And they're showing you that right here. All the immutable stuff is the parents of the mutable stuff, yes. And object is the thing at the top. This doesn't really look that different than some of the stuff that we looked at in Java. All right? All right. So that's day 3. And I'm not going to save it. All right. Now, what I'm going to do for the rest of this stuff, because I'm going to be done in about 15 minutes, I'm going to quickly walk through this stuff with you. It may make no sense, but at least you'll have seen some screenshots of the stuff we're going to be getting into. Now, what I'm about to tell you, this is a good news, bad news situation. The good news is I've worked with Xcode before. All right. The bad news is I want us to use the newest version that literally just came out. All right. And I'm not sure if that looks exactly like the version I've worked with or not because of non-disclosure agreements. Apple has not let people put that out on the net or put it in books yet. So I'm not sure if it's going to look exactly the same or not. Now, to make it even more complex, right now, the newest operating system that's out there, the one that we're going to have to put on your virtual desktops, is something that's called OS X. I think the latest one is Mountain Lion. I could be wrong, but I think it is. All right? I can look it up. Now, so you say, so what? Well, come late October, they're coming out with OS Yosemite, which is the newer version, which is really designed to work with Swift and everything else. So it might be that we might work with this stuff for a month and then we might go up to a new version. If that seems like it's going to be too hard, or if Terry just says, the hell with you, I ain't doing that, then we're just going to work with the Mountain Lion. That's fine. All right. Okay. When you bring it up, this is going to be Xcode. And when you start up Xcode, this is what it's going to look like. All right. And I kind of like this. And one of the reasons I wanted to use this is one of the few that actually has color in here. All right. But we're going to be using in here either iOS or Mac OS. Okay? So what's the difference? Well, typically, a lot of the stuff we do is going to be iPhone OS because that's the true mobile stuff. Whereas much of the stuff that you see in here for Mac OS is more, not for an iPad or an iPhone, no. It's more for if you're programming for a Mac. You understand what I'm saying? Now, what I just told you is only somewhat true because for whatever reason, Mac decided that they were going to combine a bunch of the stuff that, some of the stuff that I think should go in here is really in there. Such as, if I go to Mac OS and I type in command line tool, you're going to like that because literally that's like we're working in the C class. All right, so if you want to write just regular C programs, that's how you do it. Is you bring up Xcode, you go under Mac OS, and as it says there under application, you choose command line tool. Okay? Each one of these, framework, application plugin, system plugin, and other, each time you click one of these that's not gray right here, the stuff that's over here is going to change. Each time you choose something different in here, the explanation down here is going to change. Does all that make sense? And notice that when you're in the Mac OS application, as it says there, it says type equal foundation. Remember that program I showed you earlier that said import and it said foundation/foundation.h? That's because that's part of the foundation library. All right. Much of the stuff that we work with won't be part of the foundation library. It'll be part of what's called the Cocoa Touch library as we get into that. All right. The good news is you're going to have this stuff. Mac has got a boatload of stuff out there already too. So if you go and you look at this, I wanted to show you this. If you go in and you look at this, and you say, okay, do I understand this? Or maybe a little bit, all right? But if you go through and you start looking at it, I wanted to mention just this one thing to you. Be in here then. Hopefully I put it in here, otherwise I've got it saved, so now I don't. And I didn't save it. All right. This is what happens when you got way too much stuff open. Yeah, the connection was interrupted. Yeah, whatever. All right. What I wanted to show you is there's a lot of stuff out here, some of which I've been going through. But if you look out here, and I'll save this URL, this is Apple's thing on learning Objective-C. It's not an online tutorial, but it's just literally, as you start going through it, okay? Plus, they have some stuff that you need to download from them, which I downloaded, and I've got to move it over. Okay, but just so you know, if you go out just to here, to developer.apple.com, that's basically that's the Apple developer site. What I had to do a year ago before I realized we could possibly virtualize it was get those 6 machines. Then I had to go in and there's different accounts that you can sign up for. Okay, I had to sign up for a university account. That was a pain in the butt because when I did all that stuff, it was mid-November and our CIO was out of the office for most of December. And everything that we did had to be signed off by somebody who had a lot more authority than I do. And I found out it had to all be signed off by her. So we were constantly sending emails and stuff back and forth. So we did that. And then I had to have users come in here and set up accounts and do everything else. I don't want to go through that, pardon my French, but crap, again, I just don't want to. That's why I'm hoping if he virtualizes it, it's going to work. We'll just use these machines. I'll be able to keep taping. Life will be much sweeter. If for some reason we can't, we'll work with what we've got. All right. All right. So what's going to happen when you go in there and you create yourself one of these projects is this is what's going to be created for you. And it wasn't Cocoa Touch, I guess it's Cocoa. But if you look right here, this says that what we're about to do is we're about to create a class that's called Simple Car. And once we do that, what's going to happen is that interface will be created for you automatically. Remember earlier we had a float in there that was called Fill Level, and then we had another thing that was called Get Gas or whatever the heck it was. You have to add those. But it builds the template in there for you, to which you can just add information. All right? And it does the same kind of thing as far as building a template in the implementation file. Every single time that you create any kind of program in here, other than just a simple C program that you're running, anytime that you do this, you're going to have 2 files. One's called simplecar.c. And you go, well, yeah, the other one's one's called simplecar.h. And you go, yeah, the other one's simplecar.c, right? No. For whatever reason in this language, they didn't call it .i, but the implementation file has got a .m extension on it. So if you create a brand new, yeah, I'm sure it's for Microsoft. Yeah, there you go. But if you create yourself a brand new project and you put a new class in it, and you call it, for example, simple car like this, automatically what will be created for you is simplecar.h and simplecar.m. All right, M as in Mary. So simplecar.h, like Harry, would be where you put your interface. Simplecar.m is where you put your implementation. All right? And what they're saying in here is, okay, what does a car need? Well, at a minimum, it'll need a make, a model, and a VIN number. So notice what they start adding in here. Okay. Personally, I would have made VIN number. I probably would have made that a string because I thought VIN numbers can have letters in them. Okay? But I think the reason that they did it as a number was to show you different kinds of data types. But I don't know because I didn't write this. All right, but notice with each one of these, the name of the variable followed immediately by an asterisk, a space, all right, and the variable type, like NSString, followed immediately by an asterisk, a blank space, and the name of the variable. Data type with an asterisk, variable. Data type with an asterisk, variable. So in English, this means make is a pointer to an NSString object. Model is a pointer to an NSString object. VIN number is a pointer to an NSNumber object. Does that make sense? And we made these NSStrings and NSNumbers as opposed to mutable because once you set the make and the model for a car and a VIN number, they don't change. All right. Now, probably if we did something in here like color, as an example, we'd probably set it up as a string, as an NSString. However, you know, what if you get into an accident, you decide you want to change the color of your car? It could happen. Or you just decide you love the car, but you hate the color. My wife and I drove by, I don't know where we were last week. We were someplace in Janesville. We saw someone who had painted a car. It was hot metallic purple. I had never seen that color before. I can't even describe it to you. But I'm going to take a wild guess here and say that that car, when the person got it, wasn't that color. All right, maybe I'm wrong. Okay. So what you end up putting in your interface is this. So this interface that we see right in front of us right here has what? 3 properties. All right, an NS string property make, an NS string property model, and an NS number property vin. In addition, it has 3 set methods. All right, and notice they call them set vin, set make, and set model. You're going to learn first one way of creating set and gets, then you're going to learn another way to create set and gets, and then we're going to finally say, the hell with it, and we'll let the system create the sets and gets for us. Not like we did in Eclipse. We're just not going to put them in at all. We're just going to let the system do them for us. No. No. Good question. All right? Because typically when you do create your own sets, you call the set the same name as the variable. Huh? It's just another weird thing that the language does. Maybe because you can. I don't really know. I honestly don't know. All right. We also have another method down here that's not a setter or a getter. So they just say that it's a convenience method. All right. And this hasn't even gotten hard yet. Just take my word for it. It gets much harder. But again, the good news is we're going to go over this. We're going to write 1 or 2 apps, and that's going to be it as a class. All right, I'm going to give you the code, and as we write them, I'll make sure that in the code that I create, I write comments all the time. So if you decide you want to go back later and take a look at it, you'll be able to. But this is going to save us a boatload of time come spring. Because I'm not going to have to spend 6 weeks doing what I had to spend 6 weeks with the people last year. And that was just getting them up to speed. All right. The rest of this, I don't know, there's nothing in there we really need. Okay. So notice here. And you know what, Mark, you might have been right. That might have been an error, because if you look down lower, they now have changed it back to new. All right. And it wasn't the sets, it's the gets. So notice that the get, all right, make, model, etc. We'll go over all this. And then as soon as you say I understand it, I'll say good. Then we're not going to use it anymore. But no, really though, there's a reason for going over it though. No, you're like, well then why the hell even go over it? Because some people still do it this way. But it's not the recommended way of doing it anymore. So I think it's important that we go over the stuff, because you might see it if you actually go out and look at the actual code out there. But it's not the recommended way of doing it anymore. What is? We're going to get to that in a later class. All right. So then here, then we have to start actually creating the implementation. And that's what it's going to look like. Okay. Now let's talk about what all this stuff means in here. Okay, some of it is what you think. Doesn't return anything, doesn't return anything, doesn't return anything, doesn't return anything. Okay? All right. Name of the method, name of the method, name of the method, name of the method. All right? And actually I lied, because the name of the method is actually this and this. We'll get to that in just a second. All right? What we're passing into the method, all right? And basically the type of what we're returning, same thing, same thing. So this is called set vin, this is called set make, this is called set model. Believe it or not, this one is, the actual name for that is set make and model. Because anything that you put in there that comes after a colon is part of the name. So if I was passing 6 things in there, let's assume for a second I was passing in 6 things. I don't care what they are. Let's just say I'm passing in 6 things that are called number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. All right. Then the name of that would be set number 1, and set number 2, and set number 3, and set number 4, and set number 5, and set number 6. You don't need the word and in there if you don't want to put it in. All right. So this stuff ends up looking real ugly real fast. If you've got very difficult things that you're passing in, it's got a lot of stuff in it that you're passing in. All right. Good news is, look at them. That isn't too bad. Those are gets, right? Return make, return model, return vin. That looks pretty similar to stuff that we've done like in Java. Okay. And what are we saying? That's the name of the method, and that's the type of value that it's returning, a pointer to a string. This goes back to what you mentioned before, and I was wrong when I said this. So in here, these are your getters. Notice that the name of the method is the exact same name as the name of the variable that you're creating. That's not only considered, right practice or a practice, it's considered the right way of doing it. Now, so Mark raises his hand and he goes, okay, if I want to, can I still call them set make, set model, and set vin? The answer is yes, you can. Okay? But the good news is, the reason I think the author is showing it to you like this is when we get into it in a little bit more depth, you'll see that you have to put a line of code, one line of code in, one line. And if I have 15 different variables, that one line of code will automatically write for me 15 getters and 15 setters without me doing anything. It'll write them for me automatically. Okay? I think that's good news at least. All right. So here's the set methods, and it looks a little ugly, but basically what we're saying is I'm passing in this thing called new make. Okay? And I want to take that thing that's passed in called new make, and I want to go and basically assign it to my variable that's called make. Again, that's not all that different from the way we did it in Java. Okay? As I already mentioned, these brackets are going to drive you nuts for a while. That's just the way that it is. Okay. And here's the actual main that you write for it. And you go, what the hell is this? The good news is that'll be written for you automatically. Everything that's done in this language is done through pointers, all right, including memory allocation. And what this says is dynamically allocate memory as I need it and put it in a thing that's called pool. Then when you're all done, drain the pool. Kind of like if you imagine it was a swimming pool. This is saying fill it with water. This says now dump all the water out. All right, for lack of better words. All right. And the rest of it is just kind of window dressing that's on there. So it doesn't look like much. All that to say the make of the car is Honda. All right. But we're going to do something very similar to this one. Now they talk about property and synthesize. When you go through here and you start writing a synthesize method, that's when your getters and setters are going to be written for you automatically. All right, I'm just going to hold off on that. So what happens is all that stuff that you saw right here, keep going, come on. All of this stuff that you saw here, all of this set stuff that's right there, all of that, and all of that that's right here, and all of this good stuff that we see, not the convenience method, but everything else, after we go and add just a line or two of code, that's going to end up changing. So it looks just like this. And so that becomes your .h file, and that becomes your .m. I don't know about you, but to me that's a hell of a lot smaller. We didn't have to write any of those gets and any of those sets. But again, it's important that you go over them so you can kind of, in your own mind, if nothing else, reconcile how this is similar to Java and the fact that there are people who still code it that way out there. All right, they don't use synthesizing. All right, so we're going to get to that in a later chapter. You really won't do it with new code, but you'll find out that it still is done with older code. All right. Oops, I don't want to do that. Let's see, or did I close it? Cancel. I think I just closed number 5. All right. And these I'm going to go over. I'm going to be done by 4. All right. So it says there's 2 approaches in C for making memory. Up until a few years ago, you as a programmer, if you think that the stuff I've shown you now is like head scratching, you as a programmer Up until a couple years ago, every time you created an object, you were responsible for allocating its memory, and when you were done with it, you were responsible for deallocating its memory. You had to do that. There was no pool like this. All right. But what they decided a couple versions ago in Xcode is that's too much work. So let's let the system dynamically allocate and deallocate objects. And it does it by using something that's called ARC, A-R-C, which is automatic reference counting. All right. And a lot of it I've already mentioned to you. It's with the pool stuff, etc. And when you work with that, it allows you to do this. And then when car is not needed anymore, it'll automatically be deallocated. And that's what the author talks about in this particular. All right? And they get into retain and release and stuff. I'm just not going to get into that with you right now. Plenty of time to talk about that stuff. Again, back in the olden days, you had to keep count. Not only that, let's say Mark and I are working on a program together. And my code, I create an object. And I don't need the object anymore, but guess what? Mark needs it. Are you with me? So I don't need it anymore, but Mark does. So then what has to happen is, it used to be when I created my object, I had to do what's called a retain. All right? Then when Mark wanted to use it, he had to do a retain. So this counter that they talk about was now 2. One for when I retained, one for when Mark retained. Now I don't need it anymore. So I call a release. Now my retain count goes down to 1. If he didn't do that, then he couldn't access it anymore. All right? And this became such a nightmare, a logistic type of nightmare, that typically it's not done, at least not very often like that anymore. All right, then finally, categories are kind of a cool thing. I've got a question for you. If I make a class, in fact, let's do this with Java. I make a class that's called employee, okay? And now I want to make another class that's called production worker. What do I do with production worker? What does it do? It's a child of employee, right? It extends employee. All right. What if I had the class that was called array, and I wanted to go and I wanted to create my own stuff for arrays, because arrays are cool, but I want to create things that will automatically sort arrays in ascending or descending order. Are you with me? I'm hosed because I don't own that class. There's a class called array. I don't own it. Guess what? In categories, you can grab all the existing classes and add your own stuff to them if you want. So you can take stuff that's already out there and you can add stuff to it. It's kind of like having your own library within a library, for lack of better words. And you can choose, after you do that, you can share all that stuff that you've added with other people if you want to do that. This is a really powerful feature, but it's a fairly advanced feature. All right, I'm not going to go through it at all right now, but that's what they mentioned in this particular one. All right. So what I wanted to do is, I'm done lecturing, but what I wanted to show you, that's perfect, that's where I want to be. This was the stuff from last year, so I've got to dig through this. There's tons of articles on how to use this stuff. Not going to go through any of those. Yeah, don't worry about the homework. These are what I went over in class, so that stuff is still out there. I'm not going to throw that stuff back out there because on the blackboard. I'm just going to leave it here. All right. These are some more tutorials from Toots Plus and other places that I found. This is some stuff that's just on Objective-C. That's the name of the book. It's from Big Nerd Ranch. And you say, what, Big Nerd Ranch? There's actually a place in Atlanta. They've got this humongous warehouse that's a metal warehouse, and they teach people from all over the country how to write Objective-C in there. And Brian, I think it's Hildebrand, he's one of the guys from Big Nerd Ranch. In fact, if you see his picture, he looks like a typical guy, except he's got a hat on like Hoss Cartwright used to wear. All right. So I'm going to go look for that during the break and see if I can find it. But like I said, if I can find all that stuff, I'm going to throw it all out there. All right, all the lectures will be put out there. And during the break, what I'll do is I'll go in there and I'll look. I wonder if Stefan's always been my resource for this. So it doesn't look, let's see. I'm going to look in here to see if he still has that saved. Otherwise, I'm going to have to find it. All right, but I'm going to show you the book. And again, all that stuff will be out there if you are interested in it. And if you're not, then just forget it's there. Do you still have your Big Nerd Ranch Objective-C book PDF someplace? I actually just did a search on your H drive and I didn't see it on there.
Oh, yeah, because I called it.
Okay.